In the merciless Sahara, a broken soldier stumbles, his past erased by a fiery explosion. Hunted by extremists, James Holt is a weapon forged by betrayal. His daughter, Saria, fights to save him and their world. Can she shatter his chains before it's too late? Dive into their saga. Like and subscribe for more epic tales. The Sahara Desert stretched endlessly, a sea of gold and rust beneath the scorching sun. James Holt staggered through the dunes, his boots sinking into the blistering sands. His body ached with every step, but there was something worse. His mind. Empty, blank, broken. He couldn't remember his name, his past, his purpose. The battle, the explosion, everything before that moment was lost. Each grain of sand felt like an enemy, grinding into his skull. 36 hours. He'd been lost in this desert for over a day and a half, his military uniform ragged, his face unshaven and bloodied from the explosion. But he didn't remember how it happened. He only remembered nothing. A shadow loomed in his vision, and his eyes barely focused on the armored figures approaching. His limbs shook with exhaustion, but his instincts clicked in. They were here to finish what had been started. "You're the one," a voice rasped, cutting through his fog. "The hero. We found you." The man who spoke wore the insignia of General Varkis' faction, an extremist group, aiming to eradicate the Zorathians. Varkis had brainwashed him, twisted him into something unrecognizable. They didn't care about heroes. They cared about weapons. "Who am I?" James whispered, his voice hoarse, his thoughts fragmented. "You're the weapon we need," the soldier replied coldly. And just like that, James Holt ceased to be a man. He became a tool. Saria Holt stood at the helm of her diplomatic ship, staring out at Earth, her heart a tangled mess of hope and fear. She could barely make out the curvature of the planet beneath her, the twinkling lights of cities dotting the surface. Earth, her birthplace, the home she once shared with James and Lyrian, the home that now felt as distant as the stars themselves. Her mother, Lyrian, a Zorathian, had given everything for peace, for love. And James, her father, had once been her rock. But now, he was a memory, a ghost, torn away by war and brainwashed by General Varkis, a man she barely recognized. But in her heart, she still felt him, still believed in him. 5 years had passed since the explosion that shattered her world. But the pain of that loss never faded. Saria's mission was simple yet monumental: to unite the fractured species, the humans, and Zorathians. She was the bridge, the levying symbol of their forbidden love, of their possible future. The peace treaty she carried in her hands was her last hope for salving both sides. But she wasn't naive. She knew Varkis would stop at nothing to prevent peace. And worse, he held her father, the very man who could undo everything, under his control. Saria, her second-in-command, spoke, breaking her thoughts. "We're ready to depart. The summit awaits." Her eyes narrowed, determination flooding her veins. "This is for you, Father. This is for all of us." The ship's engines roared to life. The cold, unforgiving winds of Antarctica whipped across the icy plains as Saria Holt's ship descended. Her pulse quickened, anticipation swirling in her chest. The peace summit was imminent. The treaty she carried could end the war, but only if the factions were willing to listen. Suddenly, an alert blared through the control room. The ship jolted, shaking violently. Saria's second-in-command, a seasoned veteran, shouted above the noise, "We've got incoming. It's an ambush." Before she could respond, the hull rattled under the impact of laser fire. Varkis' forces had found her. Panic surged as the crew scrambled to defend themselves. But it was too late. Two enemy ships appeared from the swirling clouds, their weapons locked onto the diplomatic vessel. "Get to the escape pods," Saria ordered, her voice calm but sharp. Her eyes darted to the cockpit, where the lights flickered and alarms screamed. But she didn't move, not yet. She had a responsibility to finish what she'd started. And then she saw him, a figure cloaked in black, descending from the shadows of the sky, moving like a predator. The moment James Holt landed on the ship's metal plating, a chill shot through her veins. His face was hidden, but the aura of familiarity was unmistakable. As he approached, Saria's heart skipped, the tension in her chest tightening. She wasn't ready for this. He wasn't ready for this. Father, the word left her lips, weak and uncertain. She didn't want to believe it, couldn't believe it. He removed his hood, his eyes cold, devoid of recognition. A stranger stood before her. You're the enemy, James said, his voice a blade, sharp and precise. His weapon hummed to life, the barrel aimed directly at her chest. Saria's pulse raced. She stepped back, her mind struggling to comprehend the sight before her. This was her father, turned into an enemy. No, James, it's me, your daughter, she pleaded, stepping forward. But his expression remained unmoved, his finger tightening on the trigger. The cold metal of the restraints bit into Saria Holt's wrists, binding her to a chair in the dimly lit cell. Her mind raced, her body trembling, not from fear, but from the crushing heartache that gnawed at her soul. She had tried to reach him, to remind him of who he was, of who they were. But James had seen her as a Zorathian threat, an enemy to be destroyed. The door to the cell slammed open. James stepped inside, his face an emotionless mask, his eyes cold and calculating. He was a stranger to her now, no longer the father who had once held her in his arms. Whispered words of love as they trained together beneath the desert stars. Saria Holt, his voice was a low, mechanical growl. Tell me where the Zorathian base is, and this will be over quickly. Her chest tightened. The weight of her father's transformation was unbearable. She hadn't expected this, not this cold, detached man standing before her. The man who had once laughed with her, cried with her, was now a machine of war. Please, Father, her voice cracked. Don't you remember me? Don't you remember Lyrian? You loved her. You loved me. He didn't react. He just stared at her with empty eyes. A moving. A soldier carrying out orders with ruthless precision. I don't know you, he said, his tone flat. You are a Zorathian. I have no use for you. Saria's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't her father. This was a weapon, and Varkis had made him the enemy. The dim light of the prison cell flickered as Saria Holt sat, eyes locked on the cold, indifferent figure of her father. He stood just a few feet away, his back to her, checking his weapon with methodical precision. James Holt, her father, was no longer the man she had known. He was a weapon, a machine, devoid of emotion or memory. The man who had once loved her mother, Lyrian, was gone, buried beneath layers of manipulation and control. But Saria wasn't divvying up. She couldn't. She had to reach him, no matter the cost. Slowly, carefully, she began the ancient Zorathian mind meld, her breathing steady. The air around her hummed with energy as she reached out, connecting her mind with his. She flooded his thoughts with images, memories of Lyrian, of their love, of their family. The warmth of her mother's smile, the sound of Lyrian's laughter echoing in their small desert home. The night they had spent together beneath the stars, whispering vows of love. James, his arms around Saria as a child, teaching her how to fight with a tender, yet fierce love. Don't you remember? She whispered, her voice soft but pleading. You loved her, and you loved me. The connection deepened, the memories of Lyrian's golden eyes flashing before him. The first time James had held Saria, his face illuminated by the glow of the twin moons in the Sahara. Her mother's last words, the promises she made, rang through his mind. Suddenly, James's hand shook. The weapon he held slipped slightly in his grasp. He closed his eyes tightly as the memories rushed through him, overwhelming him. I remember, he whispered, his voice cracking. I remember her. For the first time in 5 years, there was a spark, a flicker of his true self. The pounding of boots against the cold, rocky floor echoed through the Australian outback base as the alarms blared. Saria Holt's heart raced. Varkis's forces were closing in. They found the base, and in mere moments, they would breach the gates. But she wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She was her father's last hope. The cell door slid open with a metallic groan. James Holt entered, his expression unreadable, his eyes distant. He was a soldier now, no longer the father she had known. But the glimmer of recognition, the brief flicker of their shared past, still lingered beneath his cold exterior. The mind meld had worked, just enough to crack his programming, just enough to give her a chance. "You have to get me out of here," Saria urged, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "They're coming." James didn't move, his hand still wrapped around the cold, metal weapon at his side. His gaze was fixed on her, almost like he was struggling with a decision. His fingers tightened on the grip. "I'm not the man I was," he said flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. "I don't even know who I am anymore." The words hit Saria like a physical blow. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. "You're my father," she whispered fiercely. "And you loved her. You loved Lyrian. You loved me. That's who you are." For the briefest moment, his eyes flickered. The weapon lowered, just a fraction. The air between them seemed to hold its breath. Then, without warning, the ground trembled under a blast of gunfire. The Varkis forces had arrived. James snapped into action. With a swift motion, he freed Saria from her restraints, his movements quick and precise. There was no time for hesitation. They had no choice but to escape, together, running through the corridors, side by side. The sound of explosions and gunfire ringing in their ears, Saria looked up at him. The man she had once called father was back, and together, they would fight for their future. But the desert was waiting, and so was the beast that would soon tear them apart. The harsh winds of the Sahara desert pummeled their faces as James and Saria trudged through the blistering sandstorm. They had barely escaped the chaos of the Outback base, but their freedom came at a price. Both were wounded. James had several cuts across his face, and Saria's leg was still throbbing from the battle. But there was no time to rest. They were being hunted. Behind them, the enemy forces were regrouping, determined to drag James back under Varkis's control. But Saria wouldn't let that happen. She couldn't lose him again. The sun was setting, painting the desert sky in hues of orange and red. The twin moons were just beginning to rise. It felt almost surreal, the way the desert stretched out before them, vast, endless, unforgiving. And yet, it was in this place where she had trained with her father, learned to fight under the cold glow of those very same moons. "Father," Saria said, her voice strained from the cold wind, "we have to reach the outpost. The Zorathians there can help us." James didn't respond at first, his gaze fixed ahead, his expression unreadable. The weight of his past, of his memories, still haunted him. His mind was torn between the soldier Varkis had turned him into and the father he used to be. But then, he stopped walking, his face hardening as he turned toward her. Suddenly, the ground shook violently, a deafening roar cutting through the wind. From the sand dunes ahead, a massive, fanged sand behemoth burst forth, its gaping maw snapping at them like a hungry beast. "Run," Saria shouted. But James had already moved. He threw himself in front of her, roaring as he pulled her to the ground just as the behemoth lunged. James Holt wasn't just her father anymore. He was her protector once again. And in that moment, the man she had lost was finally returning to her. The sound of explosions echoed through the dense canopy of the Amazon rainforest, as the jungle trembled beneath the weight of the battle raging in the clearing ahead. James and Saria had made it past the initial wave of enemy fire, their path a mix of narrow escapes and desperate sprints, until they finally reached the heart of Varkis's stronghold. The base was a fortress of concrete and steel, hidden deep within the verdant wilderness. The air was thick with smoke and the faint scent of burning vegetation. It was a far cry from the desolation of the desert, yet it felt as hostile, as deadly. "We can't let him escape," Saria said through clenched teeth, her eyes scanning the jungle around them. Her hand gripped the hilt of her blade tightly, fingers numb from the tension. The fight was inevitable, they knew it, but it was more than that now. This was about her father, the man she had fought so hard to bring back. And this was about the future they still had the chance to claim. Varkis was waiting, hidden somewhere in the depths of his fortress. James's presence was unmistakable, a threat to everything Varkis had built. He couldn't afford to let them live. A sharp, guttural voice crackled over the comms. Activate the control sequence. Make them pay. A sickening realization settled in as James tensed beside her. The moment was here. Varkis's mind control had been triggered. The words fell like ice as James's eyes darkened, his hand reaching for his weapon instinctively. The cold detachment in his gaze sent a shiver down Saria's spine. "Father, no," she cried, stepping between him and the weapon he aimed directly at her. His hand trembled, his fingers tight around the trigger. But then she remembered. The lullaby. Saria took a breath and began to sing, her voice trembling but steady. The haunting melody of the lullaby Lyrian had sung to them both. A lullaby that once soothed James's soul. Her voice was pure, echoing through the trees, and for the first time in 5 years, James's hand faltered. His memories, his love for her, for Lyrian, came flooding back, shattering the control. No more. The words were raw, breaking free. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, they were fighting on the same side. The cold winds of the Himalayas swept through the quiet valley, rustling the evergreen trees that lined the mountainside. James Holt stood before the small, hidden grave of Lyrian, his gaze fixed on the mound of earth that marked the resting place of the woman who had once been his everything. Saria stood beside him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her eyes reflecting a storm of emotions. She had always known this moment would come. Her mother's grave, tucked away in the mountains, was more than just a resting place. It was a symbol of all the sacrifices they had made. For peace, for love. James reached down, his hands trembling slightly, and placed a single Zorathian flower on the grave, its petals glowing faintly under the moonlight. Lyrian's spirit felt so close in this place, so real. The memories of her laughter, of their love, flooded back like a surge of warmth in the cold night air. Saria's voice broke the silence. "We'll make it right, Mother. We'll finish what you started." James turned to her, his eyes heavy with guilt and resolve. The weight of the past had been unbearable, but now, standing here with Saria, he felt the first stirrings of hope. Hope that wasn't just a memory. "We will, for her, for both of you," he whispered, his voice raw but determined. They stood in silence for a moment, honoring the past. Then, side by side, they turned toward the future. The war wasn't over, but their fight for peace, their fight for unity, was just beginning.